another. We will record the meeting, as you've just heard. If there are any moments where you do not want to be included in that recording, let us know, and we will take that section out. And then lastly, any questions that you might have throughout these sessions, comments, reflections, please feel free to share them in the chat, and there'll be a conversation happening there as well. I would like to move to thinking about, or to sharing perhaps just briefly from HIC's side, what are co-learning spaces? You can move to the next slide, please. Perhaps it's possible even to make them a bit larger, Aurelie. I'm not sure if everyone is able to see. But so co-learning spaces in HIC, you'll see there are three broad purposes. The first one is that we do co-learning to learn collaboratively. And in HIC, that means that we value everyone's ways of knowing and of doing, and that and that really each of these has value and is valued in return. Co-learning is not only for learning as a practice, but it's really an exercise of cross-regional political reflection and solidarity. And during these 4 sessions, we will be exploring very much differences and similarities of common struggles in various contexts and regions. And co-learning spaces are about pluralizing our advocacy work. And we want to collectively identify changes that we want to bring about as a coalition in various advocacy processes and fora. Next slide, please.
Yolande?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but we don't have Arabic translation. I'm checked with others because I don't hear Arabic, and other also told me we didn't have Arabic translation in the voices. So please check that.
Can you hear me? تسمعيني دلوقتي يا هلا?
Yes, we can hear. I can hear Mandy well, our Arabic interpreter.
Yes, now we hear the Arabic. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you for letting me know, Hala. Great. What are the precedents in HIC for co-learning? As you will be aware, if you've been part of previous co-learning spaces, we have a very long history of learning practices in HIC regionally as well as cross-regionally. Last year, we had 3 co-learning spaces on 3 themes that you can see on the slide: feminist approaches to habitat, land rights, and the third one was multi-level advocacy. And just last month, we actually also held a co-learning space on climate justice, which some of you may have been part of as well. You may be asking, why social production of habitat? What is social production of habitat? And the reason that this co-learning space is themed in this way is because it comprises one of the 4 strategic pillars of HIC's work, which are broadly human rights related to habitat, with a specific focus on the adequate right to housing and land, then social production of habitat, and then habitat and gender equality, as well as habitat and sustainable environment. What is the goal of this co-learning space on social production of habitat? If you can skip to the next slide. Just very quickly. Okay, I think we have a bit of a pause in the slides. There we go. It's to build a common understanding about concepts and practices related to social production of habitat, and to craft a collective voice for political action and joint advocacy strategies. I'd like to now give a brief overview of the 4 sessions that we will be together over the next 4 weeks. You can move to the next slide. The session today is really focused on coming to a common cross-regional understanding of what we mean by social production of habitat, and to contextualize that in the history of HIC. Next week's session will be looking at social production of habitat in practice, so looking at various experiences across regions. The third session will be focusing on legal and public policy frameworks. And the fourth session is about defining that common voice and advocacy objectives. So to craft a joint agenda together, what mobilization on social production of habitat looks like. As I mentioned, the co-learning spaces are really a space of horizontal exchange and really of valuing everyone's voice. And so that means that they've also been crafted by HIC members. And we have 6 facilitators who I'd like to introduce to you. And I'm going to ask each of you, please, to open your camera when I call your name and just to give a wave so that everyone in the room knows who you are. The facilitators come from 3 different regions: Latin America, Africa, and MENA, and they all are part of HIC member organizations. So from Latin America, Ana Pastor and Virginia Pastor. Then from Africa, we have Irene Kinoti and Leon Guy Mfomu. I hope you can see them on the screen. Then from MENA, we have Hazem Abdallah and Maha Ahmed. And today, Maha and Leon will be facilitating the session with you. They have, over the last 8 months, been crafting this entire learning agenda and program with the support of a team of learning officers who are staff members in HIC, each from the various offices. Diana Washira, who is based in Kenya, is the learning officer with the General Secretariat. Areli Sandoval, who's waving now, who's really been coordinating and supporting this co-learning space in Mexico, and then Hala Murad from Jordan with the Housing and Land Rights Network. My time is running, but I'm almost done, I think. And what I would like to share is, who are you, or who are we in the room? Where do we all come from? And just a very brief overview of participants according to who has registered. And you will see almost all continents are represented, which is really great. We have 40% of participants from Latin America. I'm not going to read all the different countries, but you can see them here. 27%, so the blue triangle, from Africa, so HIC members across those various African countries. MENA region represented, Europe, Asia, and North America. So once again, welcome, really looking forward to this time together, and I will now hand over to Areli. Areli, we can't hear you. Can you unmute your mic? Great.
Disculpen. Muchas gracias, Yolande, por haber dado.
Thank you so much, Yolanda, for having given us this introduction, and overall, as our Secretary General of HIC, it is an honor that you have been so kind to join us today and being able to present the works that we will be doing today. As Yolanda has been saying, today is our first session, where the main axles will be contextualization, origin, and journey of HIC on social production of habitat throughout or across the regions towards a common understanding on the matter. Our overall objective is to have a context and see how this concept comes about and these processes of social production of habitat in our coalition, and take a look to the differences across regions. The 2 main objectives that we have for today is, on the one hand, take a look at history and unpack the concept, see the characteristics of social production of habitat, the transformative potential it has, and how it has developed and consolidated through HIC's journeys, and then talk about the challenges in different contexts. For that purpose, we will be hearing our guest speakers from Africa and MENA, so they can talk to us from their countries, what are their challenges, their context that we are facing, and this will be the starting point for a larger conversation. Therefore, many of you were able to see that these specific objectives are related to the asynchronic activity that we have invited you to participate in the Google Classroom. These are the two questions that we asked you before our meeting today. I will give you an overall of the answers that we received. The first question that we asked you as attendees is to mention, if you were able to mention, from 2 to 5 words that were you would associate with the concept of social production of habitat. We also ask you to highlight a problem or a challenge from your regional, national, or local context that can be addressed from the social production of habitat approach. This is a small summary of the answers that you have provided to us. It has been really interesting what you have been sharing with us, and it will be really important for our speakers know what all our HIC members are thinking about, which are the words that you have related to social production of habitat. You said process, processes, organization, participation, social mobilization, also with cooperativism, housing as a right, access to land and housing, integral development, collaboration, coexistence, community-based incremental housing, incrementalism, community-based incremental housing, which is a much more complex concept, and then in everything that is based on needs, dialogue of knowledge, right, learning, means and resources, construction, and interest groups.
Some of the words that arose in this activity in the classroom of Global. So before the question of what are the challenges or problems that can be addressed in their localities, regions, countries, do you identify, well, as the ones that could be addressed from the perspective of the social production of the habitat, or that the social production of the habitat could help to face certain problems and challenges? You highlighted the following ones. For example, the access to land and adequate housing, especially for women. This challenge you consider as one of the ones that you can address from the social production of habitat. Also, the shortage, access to housing. The problem or challenge of high costs of living. There's another challenge that you highlighted, that it's the need of infrastructure in emerging neighborhoods. And before this, like the social production of the habitat that you consider that could help or contribute to address the housing deficit. You also mentioned, other participants mentioned that they see that there's a rising of housing backlog in construction, right? At the same time, the government expenditure is reduced for construction for public, fully subsidized public housing. And you identify as a problem or a challenge the need of economic and symbolic resources for the sustainability of the projects. There's another problem that was also repeated in many of the occasions is the mass evictions of tenants or eviction of families. And last but not least, the problem or challenge of insecurity of tenure. So these are the main ideas that you have told us. And now I would like to ask if there's someone in the room that would like to add any words that resonate in your mind according to social production of the habitat, additional to what I have shared. Or if you want to highlight or add any problem, right? We can take a few minutes so that we can listen to you. So we give you the floor. And as I am sharing the screen, I would ask Diana to help us see if someone is requesting the floor. Please.
Yes, Areli. We have Anna, who's requesting the floor. Anna, please go ahead.
Gracias, Diana.
Thank you, Diana and Areli. This work has been amazing, and I would add to the words the control of the process, habitat process from the community side.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you very much.
Okay, back to you, Areli. I don't see any other hands, but I will let you know in case of any.
Muy bien, Diana, gracias.
Thank you, Diana, so much. It was only to be able to listen. If there was something else that you wanted to add, we are only trying to break the ice, establish the tone of this session, and we will then get into listening to our guest speakers today. For that, let me give the floor to our facilitator, Leon Goy Famu, that is gonna present and gonna be sharing and presenting our first speaker. So please, Leon, go ahead.
Areli, if I may, it seems Leon has a slight challenge with internet. So he's struggling to get back into the session. Yeah.
Bien, esperamos un minutito.
So let's wait. Let's wait a minute for him. We have still have time, so we can wait.
Yeah, Diana. Hello, Diana. Diana, I think you missed Marie's hand. Marie's hand was up. I think she wanted to make contribution when I already mentioned, but you missed her hand. So I think she can use this opportunity to say what she wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Desmond. I think since we have a few minutes left, we can hear from Marie, and then we can also hear from Aline. So Marie, please go ahead, and you're welcome.
Thanks so much. This was to add to what Anna was saying about, I think if I understood correctly, about resident control of the process, but added to that self-determination. So in the social production of habitat, the space is determined by the space and the process, but also the outcome is all determined by by residents with varying levels of support. But I think the self-determination is quite important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. Let's hear from Aline.
Hola a todos y todas.
Hi, everyone. I would also like to add 2 words, self-management and autonomy, that I do believe that are in the same sense of what Marie is mentioning, right? And well, that's just it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other reflections from the floor? Oh, perfect. Milagros, sorry if I pronounce your name wrongly. Please have the floor.
Buen día, ¿qué tal?
Good morning. I believe that another word that can be added is inclusion, in the sense that in this process, social process, there's still lacking the different needs of the different populations to be included, or populational groups that are part of the society as itself, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that inclusion. Any other reflection? What comes to mind? What are the keywords that we can share? I see Aline's hand is up. I think this is for the first reflection. Yeah. So any other? And of course, please feel free to share more in the chat as we continue. And even because we do have more times for reflection and question and answer, but please feel free to let us know and we will listen to you. Okay, so since Leon is not yet back already, please go ahead and take us to the next session.
De acuerdo. Con mucho gusto,
Okay,
pues.
so gladly. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to be able to present our first spokesperson, architect Enrique Ortiz Flores from Mexico. As many of you know and know him, Enrique has been previously for many years, since so many years, a General Secretariat of the International Coalition for Habitat, and has also been president for our coalition, and currently is coordinator of the projects in the regional office for Latin America of the International Coalition for Habitat, but also has a great trajectory in the processes, educational processes, organizational processes, social processes, incidents processes, in many subjects related to the rights linked to habitat and social production of habitat. Of course, Enrique is today has been invited as a guardian of the knowledge of our coalition. That is a nice way or heartwarming way that we would like to reference him, because as we know, and with all of his years of experience and a lot of hard work in the coalition, he has had the care of being able to produce knowledge, share knowledge, and help to make a systematize the knowledge that is built together. He's an architect from the National Autonomous University, has been a professor in the bachelor's degree and master's degree of this same university, Metropolitan Autonomous University, and is part of our director of the coalition. It has promoted participative creation, right to the housing, right to the city, right to the different things, and we welcome him. He has now the floor for 20 minutes to speak about social production of habitat, unpacking the concept, characteristics, transformative potential, and the HIC's journey in its development and consolidation. Thank you so much, Enrique. You have the floor. Thank you so much. There's a lot to say in not a lot of time. So first of all, it is to say the basic characteristics of the social production, and it is that the habitant is the subject and not the intervention object of third parties. He's the one that controls the process, and he does it um, without considering it like an earning, right? It is not that you cannot not give like a space, but that's not the problem, right? We do not produce to earn money. It is just to live. So it has the value of the use, that at the end of the day, it is in the value of the change. And this is fundamental. This is the baseline of the idea of what is a social production. And there is a diversity, a huge diversity of possibilities, right? Within what the our greatest part of the cities have done in the underdeveloped countries, and in the greatest part of housing has been made by people, but with a family initiative, individual initiative, and with a lot of difficulties, many with 20, 15 years of work, right? And this is just one aspect, and I do believe it is important to highlight it. Also, the social production is a process, it is not an object. This is another thing that it's very important to consider. And it's fundamental, it's a process of life. Housing continues in life. I have been stimulating a lot of the idea of housing that has been building and with the possibilities of the growth of the family. And about housing, I have in my house, I have eliminated rooms because I don't need them, right? So it is something that it is related with our life, greatly related, and this is very important because it gives an important meaning to a product, not only of the market, but to see who buys it, with no relationship to their needs or to their possibilities or what they want, right? And with their culture, most of all. So I do believe that these are basic point of view to be able to start. Secondly, it is the social production. How was it born? Well, we did not add this name since the beginning. It's not an intellectual product. It's a process also. In Latin America, that it is where we have stimulated it with a lot of enthusiasm, and we have a very important network in HIC of a social production of housing. Well, it was born from the Cuban Revolution, in the sense that there was a reaction, a very important reaction that was very conservative, driven by the Alliance for Progress that the United States created to be able to avoid people to organize, so that people would not would agree with this type of transforming ideas. The truth is that what has been done in Latin America and many countries, well, they fell in this idea of even, and there was a lot of corporations that were done in businesses, in companies, because cooperatives is a social business. It's completely different, right? It's not the same. One is social production and the other one is not. So in our case, we started working with another way of doing things with people. And we had a lot of concerns. I had a lot of concerns since my thesis, and I did it in indigenous zones. And I faced a group in Mexico that was working in this as an organization. of architects and social workers. And this was COPEBI, one of the main bodies together with Endesco of Peru and Simba in Chile, of the main organizations that we had in Latin America that we started working with this concept, right? And I wanted to say one phrase that it was very interesting that I found in the document, foundational document of COPEBI. This is 1965. COPEBI was created in 1961 and as part of another body that was also linked at that moment to an entire process, a social process inspired in not only the ways of seeing things, right, but about thinking in people before anything. And in that text, it said that they're not getting into deep in the financial and technical aspects within the problem of housing. That is what the market production system does, but it's to promote the social interest as the main interested person that was in the COPEBI first ideas. And they added, this is very important, this action that is organized imprints in the man the real sense of responsibility. And man, we say man and woman, right? The sense of responsibility as a fundamental subject in the creation of a new world. Just imagine about this, the creation of a new world in 1965. How can they say that as today it is a fundamental phrase before and facing what's happening after COVID and right now what we're seeing and the impact, the brutal impact of nature as an answer of what we have done to her. So it makes its entire sense, deep sense of this phrase of 1965, right? When I read this, I was convinced that I had to work with them. So I finished my thesis of architect and I started working with them the next day. Since there, I've never left them. This is since 1965, in November of 1965. They were working in this for several years, and this allowed us to start working. And we had several experiences. For me, I believe it was very important to have the perspective of human rights that we started finding afterwards, because it is in the first place, the housing is a right, a human right, and we have to recognize other rights related to the habitat, not only housing. There are several rights. Secondly, that we have to defend it when it's violated. Most of the human rights organisms dedicate to that, to protect housing and people when it's violated. In HIC, when I got into HIC, we were in 11 countries seeing very hard situations, and HIC has been maintained doing that, considering that. But in Latin America, there's also we thought that it was fundamental on the entire realization of the right. The entire realization of that right, it is the production of housing, that the people can control the productive processes, and that we discovered that it's very important is that the type of production that we generated gives us the way of living in it, right? We have a video that it's very pretty. There's interviews that were performed to people in the popular housing that have made their housing by themselves, have made them by themselves. There's a lot of love there, but there's also a lot of chaos in this process. And there's an amazing difficulty in that part, but the people love their houses. So we also interviewed in that video people that were living in market places, and many of them wanted to leave because there was no human relationship. And there was also people that bought their house and there was no human relationship. If there was a flower in front of their houses, they stole it, and that was it, right? And also, well, there's the people organized. We could see what people do when they are organized and they produce their housing, and that was the richest part of it all. And this is the fundamental concept where we're living, but it exists in the social production. There's a great complexity of alternatives, since the one that is improving its house, that has been doing in steps that we have to support, and also what people do. And well, this way of producing allows, I forgot my idea because someone interrupted me. But well, we believe the fundamental is that the people take their role, the regulating role, and they can do it organized, on an organized way, so that there's different qualities of participation and ways of doing making housing in the social production. And this is very important to consider. It is not like the market production that is basically a model, and it's done in prototype systems, and the housing is done the same, right? With not a lot of differences, with no participation of the people, with no relationship with the process of organization. In social production, we have at least 5 phases. The first and the last one are the most important ones. The first one is when the people get to know each other, or they already know each other, but they organize, they see their possibilities, their capabilities, their dreams. They see it from their culture point of view, how they are related with the space. And it is very different from the market production. And the final phase, all of this entire process that starts from that phase of understanding, of starting to see what they want to do together, where they want to live, and the decisions, the basic decisions, their potentialities and their abilities, the first management that they make to be able to see who will finance, how will they support each other. This is the beginning of that. And from there, the advisory is fundamental. The technical and the social have to be together since the beginning. And from there, to have special advisory to see if they will manage the money, that they know how to manage it. If they have to administer it, they have to know a lot of things. And if they're going to buy a land, they have to have an advisory that is a specific advisory that is needed. And at the end of the day, the production of housing, at the end of the day, it is an entire process, participative process. After they made the participation, they build, they auto-build. It's not necessarily the social production is auto-built. That is a mistake. Many times the auto-building, it is created or made or mandated by the private initiative and the government, and this is not done by the social production, because this is not the decision of the people. At the end of the day, this entire participative process, and how is it going to deliver the housing, who will receive it, who has more needs, who has participated better, or everyone work in everyone's housing, and afterwards they make a raffle. That's what they do in the normal cooperative situation. So what we found in this process, it was amazing. And with this, the last stage, that is to leave it, it's completely different. People are organized, know each other, can solve problems or conflicts, and they can manage their own housing. So we go from social production of housing to a concept that is broader, that is production and social management of the habitat. The habitat is a broad word, but what is important is not the substance, but the verb of living there, right? The human being that lives there with his physical characteristics, and through the culture and the dreams of the people and their possibilities. So this gives us diversity in a book that we made, that is the one of Utopia in Construction, is the one that we made. Unfortunately, it's not translated into English, but we see 30 Latin American cases in which at least half are completely transformative, because they're not only managing the production of housing, they're also seeing how they affect the environment, right? And a growing will of avoid what's happening, the destruction of life, what we're doing in the world, right? And that there's an entire series of decisions that are very important in this production way, right? We will get into detail later on. We do not have time for that right now. But this way of production, how do we get closer, right? Very interesting on how to work the things. And the ways that are more organized of social production are the ones that are well organized. And within the organized, there's like the cooperation, right? But of housing, but not all of that of cooperation is a social production, but it's other different types of social production. It has a business point of view. The social production there is very, very important. The law, the Uruguay law of 1968, that is a fundamental baseline, because it recognized in the Uruguay law there were 70 something articles of housing that, well, there arose a ruling of with another 68 articles that are saying what is housing cooperative, right? And it distinguished that from owners and from users. The one is that is from users is much more interesting, and that, well, it has several characteristics. It's based in a technical assistance and mutual help. It's fundamental to support each other and to have technical help, self management, and the decisions that people make and how they manage the processes. They control money, the things, and well, they have a collective property way of fundamental of how they do things. They divide the interest, the absolute interest that the corporation has, and they take out the land from the market. This is fundamental because the land is from everyone. The buildings that are common buildings and the equipment, the habitat of housing is a series of equipment, and it's for all, right? It's very curious because the use of housing is the property of the user. It can be inherited to their children, and that is very, very important in this way of a Uruguay property. That is fundamental because in our countries, well, that's how people are thinking about their children. What do they leave to them? They can leave the housing when they accept the rules of how they organize, right, their life. And they also manage political independence, how they're not controlled by parties that are for the society, right? You can be even make a decision, and it's a complete decision in being part of a party, but not to mix the political the party part with the social policy, with the organization. This is very, very important.
I don't know how am I doing on time? I still have 1 minute left. Okay, well, these are basic concepts, and what we realize is that we have achieved so many things in Latin America. We have achieved to have our rights respected. We were United Nations in the first conference of the United Nations, and then we found out that all of these statements, it was all over the world. And from there, we have HIC, an initiative and then we will be able to incorporate 10 years later with a completely different concept, stronger, based on people. And from there on, we have been developing this way of social production of habitat in a quite interesting way with many instruments that we have achieved to elaborate with the assistance of so many people. But we need three main things. Acknowledges as a different kind of production to the one that is done by market. That is why we have cooperatives that are social and there are those that are not. There are some that are social and the other ones are market driven. And well, very clearly, we need to achieve to acknowledge this social production of habitat legally. So it is associated to a logic and the instruments. When we apply the same instruments, we have a very difficult task. That is why we need to have that acknowledgement of this kind of processes. And with that, we can grow so much. Experiences have been made that have proven that we can produce cheaper because there's not a business behind of that. And the production can be cheaper as long as everything is well organized. And I'll leave it up to there because I have no more time left. And if there are things to clarify, well, there will certainly be questions, and then I will have the pleasure to come back to give you the answers. Thank you so much, Enrique. It has been such an interesting path. And at this moment, we are able to hear the questions, comments, and your answers. First, we want to thank you and congratulate you. Leon and Yolande have questions for you, and I also have a question for you. Go ahead, Leon. Over to you, Leon.
I hope you can hear me well. You can hear me well, yes?
Sí.
Okay, merci.
Oui.
Thank you. I wanted to, first of all, present my apologies for not being able to be connected on time because I was supposed to be the first facilitator to speak this afternoon. But I'd like to thank my colleagues for having stepped in immediately, and I'd like to present my apologies. And I will be in a position to follow the rest of the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leon. Now I hand it over to you so you can facilitate this question and answer session. We have Yolanda, Ana, and Maja and Areli. Yolanda, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Areli, and thank you very much, Enrique. It's really good to see you again, and yeah, incredibly interesting and insightful to just hear about the long journey. I wonder, you mentioned there were 5 phases of social production of habitat, and I think you mentioned the first one. Could you share with us what the other 4 phases are? That would be really helpful to know. Thank you so much.
Sí, cómo no. Bueno, la primera es esta.
Well, the first one is the integration that's essential. That can take a long time. It can even be ending by purchasing a lot of land. And there is a place where everything can be planned. And the second phase will be planning. Planning is collaboratively made. There is also training that has been done to people so they can participate in the design of their house. They've decided where they want to live, but now they need to plan. And, you know, lots of land that are far away from the city are cheaper, but it is better to live inside the city if you know that there's going to be progression. So you need to see that the subsidies have to be progressive as well. And once that you have planned, and then you have all the permits and licenses in order to build, and you go to the building phase. That's the clearest phase of all, because it can be done by self-building. This is done frequently on the indigenous areas, community areas. Everybody helps to build one's house, and then they all build somebody else's house. And obviously, they rely on people that know how to build houses. But there's also social building of buildings, or you can hire a construction company, but it is not the construction company that will be in charge. It will be the people, the community that will be in charge, and they will be only paid for the construction service. Next, how we will be delivering, and those are essential things as well. The constitution of how you want to organize yourself. If you are going to create a cooperative, then it will be well organized under certain principles. And then you define how the deeds are being given, different ways of doing so. In the Uruguay case, they are all collaboratively building for some X numbers of hours. They are committed into that construction phase. There are others that are not like that. Maybe people can be in peril of being without a house because now they were under a let or rental services, and now the kids can no longer go to school because now they are asking them to leave the house, but their house has not yet been constructed. So there's a lot of things that you have to consider. You need to have a knowledge of how you will be operating that cooperative, and that is essential. And then once it has been constructed, you give it to the person. And then the living together experience, that is very interesting, because here in Mexico, the main cooperative that we created and that is known worldwide, we created it in the 70s, and now under crisis because they forgot to train people on the concept that we had created. The decisions are made by all. A cooperative is an instrument where everybody decides. It's not the president or the chair of that cooperative that will be deciding. Everybody contributes to the decision-making process. So when, money got involved, they did not respect how those cooperatives were created. And that was a cooperative that had been there for over 40 years. So within time, we have to take care of things, of transformative processes. So we have to be very careful. We have to talk to the children and keep in place all those transformative processes that we have created, that are the ones that will be stimulating things as things are nowadays.
Muchas gracias, Enrique. Yo las he escrito en síntesis en el chat del Zoom y lo hice en español mencionando las 5 fases.
أنا أتحدث الآن تقول ريالي باللغة الإسبانية.
Integración como la primera, la segunda planeación, la tercera construcción, la cuarta distribución Y la
عفوا لا
quinta
تصلنا الترجمة الإنجليزية
gestión del hábitat, un poco también basadas en la literatura que tú has escrito al respecto. Y ahorita van a traducirlo al
عفوا
inglés.
نحن بانتظار سماع الترجمة الإنجليزية.
Tiene la palabra
Estoy
Ana.
oyendo, estoy oyendo también la traducción al inglés. No sé por qué.
Gracias, Anneli. Me parece que nos están traduciendo en inglés a quienes estamos en el canal español. Por ahí es un
عفوا يتعني أن تكون هناك
cortito.
A very short comment. Simply, Enrique, I want to tell you that on one side, there are a lot of greetings for you. There's a lot of joy of hearing you. There are so many people celebrating your attendance on the chat and celebrating your knowledge. I want to ask you, under the impression that the different phases of social production of habitat, those are a new process of habitat. That's what I'm saying. It would be good to say that this social production of habitat and on the improvement processes, they had mentioned a word that caught my attention when we saw the words that have been given by our attendees that were talking about incremental housing, that in Latin America, we might be calling it to the improvement of popular neighborhoods. Yes, I think that we could be thinking about social production of habitat when we talk about improvement. Completely agree. There was an intervention there. Social production is not only social production of new housing. What is essential is how you are supporting people on all those popular neighborhoods that have been created individually by families. I hope that they could be organized. Here we have an improvement housing program that we elaborated with the city government. 10% of housing of this city has been improved in very few years' time. That was done with the engagement of people throughout the process that you are mentioning, that is improvement of things. I hope that it can be done now. When it is done in an organized things, you are able to have achievements. Improvement whenever natural disasters occur, like in Acapulco. You have these full towns that have been devastated by Otis. And, we need to reconstruct everything and we need to help them. And that is social reconstruction of habitat. People do participate because they want to have their home, but they cannot do the entire productive process of constructing or building a house. We have worked on this. We see that it's essential. Better things are achieved when they collectively engage, and these processes are well organized. On social production, there's something that I did not mention, but you need to have flexible regulations in place. If you want to regulate everything, you're going to drive yourself crazy. There are so many different types of cases. Some do require services. People sometimes don't have no land, and they have no land and no services. People might have services but not land. And you need to dedicate time according to the difficulties, to the hardship that people are undergoing. And you cannot regulate everything. We need to regulate the quality of that housing, so they have good living spaces, that they are well and constructed, and they have public spaces. Because sometimes you don't have that public spaces. We need to take care of that. And we need to take care of your own rights. And when I headed Honapot, I told them the first norm is not to elaborate norm, not put norms to everything or standards to everything. You need to have few norms, flexible ones, so you can manage all types of situations. It is based on trust and not in the lack of trust and excess of regulations. That is difficult to understand, but it can be done. We should do it. So let's not get scared, because what we are doing is to gather everything around life, how we generate of the social production of housing is important. The process of constructing will not be depending on the free aid given by the government, because once that free aid given by the government is over, everything's over. I will give the floor to 3 more participants that want to ask you a question. Please hear those 3 questions in a flow so you can give the answer to the 3 of them together. So let's hear the 3 questions now. Well, thank you so much, Enrique. I am going to ask Aline, Angel, and Maja to ask their questions, and then Enrique will conclude by answering to the 3 of you. Aline, please go ahead. Thank you so much. It is a real honor to hear Mr. Enrique with all of his wisdom. And my question is more related to rights, legal norms, but on the outside. You were saying how everybody is organizing itself to live together and how they will be operating and organizing themselves. But on the right side, the legal rights on social production of habitat, I'm thinking of criminalization cases and all those kind of processes. I recall in Movimiento Urbano Popular in Mexico, they were seizing land illegally to produce community housing. We know there's a right to housing that is being violated by the state. And there are organizations that sometimes break the law. They will be occupying private property to produce social habitat. So what is your viewpoint on this? What happens with criminalization processes? How the legal framework can respond on social production of habitat cases? Angel, if you please, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank you all. And it is a pleasure to hear again Enrique and all of his wisdom. What I want to do now is not to ask a question, but to share a comment of what is happening here in Guatemala. In a certain way, we are facing this housing issue, and we deal with it like an emergency. And I say emergency because that's the way that we have to do things. Social and civil society, NGOs are doing it, but using international funding. Sometimes we can act under state funds as well. But it has been 20 years, whereas in the housing law, we see the social production of habit as a methodology and possibility of having institutional programs in order to organize our population, optimization of public funds to solve housing issues. I must acknowledge that we have not yet achieved it. Maybe with a new government, we will be able to do so. But in the past, we have had terrible and corrupt governments. So my question would be, we know that things are stated on the law, but there's not a social orientation. There's fear to participating or the population engaging in their own decision-making. It is the population that should be having the control to where will we allocating all those public funds, but they don't dare to do that. I don't know if you have any experience that you can share with us, because in Mexico, you might have had any institutionalized program where the essential is, as the law sets forth, that there's a housing that it is targeting to poverty and extreme poverty, housing that is an obligation of the government. There are states that should be institutionalizing that, and maybe ONG, maybe finding funds at an international level or at a state level. But I think that it is under the responsibility of the state, and we should make the state accountable for that. I want to take Aline and Angel that even if Enrique will be talking about it, our third session is addressing legal frameworks that is more focused on legal and rights. So I want you to keep that in mind in the event that we cannot go in depth today. Then we will be hearing Maja, and then we will hand it over to Enrique so he can try to answer to the three of you. Maja, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very happy with the experience in Latin America and especially in Mexico. My question is actually because in Egypt, we do have this forced eviction and the dismantling of houses. So the participation between the people and the government, is it done through campaigns or by maybe NGOs or perhaps government organizations? I don't know. I need to know more details about your experience, and thank you very much.
Adelante, Enrique, puedes tratar de contestar en...
Please go ahead, Enrique. Could you be kind enough to try to answer in very few minutes? I believe that one of the things that is essential is the right. There are so many things to legislate. The acknowledgement of social production of habitat, because otherwise it will not grow. It will always be a little program on the side. We do need instruments. And then we have rights. There is an initiative on the United Nations to start working on the topic. But per se, there's not an initiative to do so. And on the countries, generally speaking, this is not happening. So we have to legislate. Another thing is to legislate on cooperatives, making a distinction among cooperatives that are market-driven and those that are social-driven. In Mexico, we have the cooperatives of housing cooperatives are included in the Constitution of 1917. It is unbelievable. We have it under the constitution, but we don't have the law. And Uruguay government was born with that legislation, with that law. And at least those three things are important to legislate. Then, when talking about the right to the land, it is also essential. Aline was mentioning it, and I am telling you that's fundamental. Another thing would be the fear to engage. Fear to engage is an issue that we are facing because of the control that governments want to exert over population. It is a fight that we must keep on giving. It is essential in order for us to acquire transformative strength. Unforced, there is a lot of speculation money going on. All those forced evictions can be done through the deposition or the purchases of those territories. We have so many farming people that are being dispossessed of their land in Mexico. I think that in Africa, they have suffered the same. It is essential to support the governments that want to open this way of fighting against forced eviction, like those of Guatemala. All of our countries, during the pandemic, we suffered so many forced evictions. And now we have taken some cases to court. But there's so much to do to that regard. As long as people do not organize socially and they don't have articulated strength, we cannot see these changes. We have to work a lot to obtain social organization. Thank you so much, Enrique. And now we are precisely giving the floor, handing it over to Maja. She's our facilitator that will be conducting the second part of our session to hear the perspectives and the challenges on other regions such as Africa and MENA and Northern Africa. So, Enrique, we ask you to hear this part. So please hear our Africa and MENA speakers so we can find to organize this work internationally. Maha, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ariely. Now that we have talked about the basics and fundamentals of the social production of the habitat that started in Latin America, now we are going to listen to some local and regional viewpoints. In fact, we do have Mr. Sergey, and in fact, Mr. Sergey is an economist graduated from the University of Chang in the Cameroon. He has a wealth of experience since 2009 in the Cameroonian civil society organization. He worked in the field of the coalition, and he worked in a number of programs and projects. One of them was the cost of losses linked to evictions in the city of Yaoundé. Now, currently, he is contributing to a think tank on a joint development project to give vulnerable women decent access to habitat. Mr. Sergey will talk about the social production of the HIC and what challenges we actually face in Africa. And this will be actually a way to start this dialogue. You have the floor for 10 minutes, sir. Please take the floor.
Serge, you're muted. Please unmute your mic. Sorry to interrupt, Serge. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Je crois que c'est bon maintenant.
Good.
It is okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Voilà.
Allez-y. Thank you. Ladies, gentlemen, I want to thank you, and I would like to say good evening. It's a great joy for me to be in this workshop of co-learning, this co-learning space with the Dean, Mr. Enrique, and we have read his articles when we were young in terms of the themes of habitat, and we are not really concerned by these issues. Then I would like also to thank Maha Ahmed that has facilitated this session, without forgetting my co-facilitator, Mr. Ibrahim, engineer, and I'm also not going to forget Leon P. He's the one who initiated me, who made me be interested in these issues of habitat. And we were all students, and through his regard, we were interested in these issues. The theme that I'm going to represent you this evening is social production of habitat in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, and with a common understanding. My presentation will be in the French-speaking zone in Africa, and we can do a comparison in the English-speaking zone. The French-speaking zone is a little bit behind, and what I can tell you in this fact, in my observation, it's the general objective in terms of social production. Together, we can put in place solutions that can help the French-speaking side to be able to improve the life condition of its population. As you can see, in terms of introduction, the history of the habitat doesn't start with the 1960 with the independence. No, it is not resumed by the big empires and that occupied the sub-Saharan part of the Africa during the Middle Age. What we want to say to you, for 4 centuries, Africa has had different dominations, and the most of it was the European nations. And as you know, all of you, colonization was one of the last parts, and these dominations contributed to structure the production of habitat. And the most part of the cities that we know today were founded by the people from the West, from the European side. And the theme of the social production of habitat, as you know, it's a holistic theme, quite a holistic theme that was developed entirely by HIC, and we appropriated from Africa what they did. And in this contextualization of Africa, of sub-Saharan Africa, especially this French-speaking Africa side, we have historical contextualization that once during slave, we had efforts, as you can see, we have some issues in Saint Louis in Senegal and Ogore in Senegal. And we had the second period between 1854 and 1880, which is a period of colonization. It means that colonization started to implant themselves in the territories and established a certain number of rules to manage habitat. And in this fact, it was an issue on chosen cities for the Western population. And Africans were considered as they were put aside, and they were vectors of epidemics. And in the period of 1880, for the colonization, especially the French colonization, most of lands were for the colonial masters, and they decided to establish themselves in a certain place, and as a result, the urban area was quite regulated. And in the 1970, we thought of a policy of habitat for the African population, and in this fact, we put in place, how can I put it, the construction companies, and it really evolved, and to be able to access credit and to construct housing to improve the condition of their populations. And for example, in the countries like Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Cameroon, they had the construction companies. We have a context that is purely political, and in the 1980s, the policies were put in place, the social habitat policies, and it allowed more in terms of administration, because before the regimes that the single parties, and we benefited from these habitats. And in the economical side, we had a problem. Despite the different structures that are put in place to support the social housing, the putting in place of the structural adjustment programs had slowed our countries in terms of producing housing. And up to 1990, we didn't have policies of social habitat in the French-speaking Africa, especially in the Central Africa part of the French-speaking. And the western side of the French-speaking country, we had some perspectives in terms in comparison for us. The social consequence of the social position was people had access to housing. Most of them were obligated to go to swampy areas and construct places where you cannot construct. And we had an environmental context. And as you know, the African cities are becoming more and more urban, and some populations are leaving the rural areas to come to the urban areas to live. And these slums, so that results to a lot of slums. And in terms of the greenhouse gases, we have more floodings during the rainy seasons, torrential rains, to the landslides and other effects. And it causes losses in terms of the human side, and which makes the social authorities to take measures, which is a problem in terms of the violation of the laws and the living conditions of these populations. However, the organization of the civil society, the NGO, conges, we are not putting our hands in the pocket. They are doing much effort and sensibilizing for advocacy. And I wanted to make this point to all the participants. In terms of advocacy, we have a lot of problems, a lot of worries, and I'm going to explain that a bit later. We have some platforms of consultations. We are also doing some lobbying to influence the public decision. We notice that the policy of the social production of habitat has a lot of advantage and some limits. And for advantages, when we do the promotion of the habitat social production, it has this particularity. It integrates the local materials in construction, and we are going to consider the cost of construction. And before, as I told you, the structure of our habitat is dependent on the colonial model. And as a result, we have constructed without considering the materials of construction. And it's very difficult to lead the population to consider consideration without these models, the colonial models. The mentalities are very colonial, and the authorities don't really support us in this point. We also have a problem, and all in terms of the social habitat, it needs to be a major stake for our governments. However, it limits us. We need finances, and we notice that in terms of the public level, it's a public will to have the authority to produce quality housing. And we are going to create sources of corruption, and it makes the poor excluded from the social production of habitat. And in terms of advocacy, and as I told you before, we have a problem because players are very slow in taking decisions, and they have long administrative processes, red tapeism. And we need to have clarity in these terms. And the stakes that we have in terms of the French-speaking side of Africa, we have the demographic and social stake, because the
Sorry to interrupt, but you only have 1 minute. I'm really sorry, says Maha. You only have 1 minute left. تمام.
Donc, comme je vous ai dit, nous avons
as I told you, we have a problem in the rate of urban growth, and the measures of authorities are not able to keep up with the demographic flow of population. And it is especially a problem linked to the climate change. We have more and more problems, and it has made us to have these problems. So we notice that the land in our country is a big problem, and it leads me to the main question that is going to structure this participation, is to know what common understanding can we share in terms of managing of social production of habitat in the French-speaking African zones. I thank you. Over to you. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Sergey, for your intervention. We have now listened to Africa, to an African experience, but we have another experience from Africa also. It will be presented by Mr. Ibrahim Izzeddin, who is actually a planning engineer and urban researcher at the Egyptian Commission for Rights and Freedom. He worked on the right to adequate housing, and he is director of Monech Initiative for Environmental Studies and founder of Diwan Al Umran for Urban Studies. He's going to be talking about North Africa and the Middle East with some emphasis on Egypt. In order to start our deliberations, Mr. Ibrahim, please take the floor, and you have 10 minutes only so that we can get some comments and questions from participants. Mr. Ibrahim, please take the floor.
شكرا مها شكرا تحالف
Thank you to HIC for inviting me today. Of course, I thank the dear colleagues who participated before me, Mr. Enrique and Mr. Cern, and the exciting experiment in Mexico and in South Africa. Can you hear me well? Based from the social production of habitat in the Middle East and North Africa region, while focusing on the experience of Egypt. In the beginning, I would like to say that the right to housing is a fundamental human right. And unfortunately, this right is wasted a lot in North Africa, especially in Egypt. We all suffer from it. The experience of social production of habitat in Egypt is one. It exists already, but it's not organized. It has a certain characteristic on the social as well as the economic levels. This experience is the result, is not the result of a coalition between the citizens or economic thinking, but citizens, the people are being pushed towards such experiences. This experience, what is called in Egypt the random areas, the people did not have the choice or the free choice to build their homes. It's an experience that does not emanate from a choice on part of the people to build a social life, but they were pushed towards such an experience. Social production of habitat in Egypt has a historical background that dates back to the first half of the last century following World War II. It's based on the scarcity of building materials such as iron and cement in particular, and this was reflected on the housing policy in Egypt and created a gap between supply and demand due to the withdrawal of investors in the sector. They did not build any new houses. In the second half of the 20th century in Egypt, the policy, the official policy of the state moved from the from the royal to the Republican system, and the Republican system in Egypt started with the socialist experience, which had its own characteristics that was reflected on the state policies, and in particular on housing laws. A number of laws, successive laws were issued, reducing the rent values of apartments by 15%, followed by another 20%. And this was aimed to gain popular support for this socialist experience. And this also reflected negatively on the housing market, and individuals who thought of producing new houses didn't go into the field because profitability from the rents at that time was not fruitful, and therefore there was no new production of homes that were legal. And then another pattern started to show. In the 50s and 60s of the last century was the actual start of a new crisis that was clear in the housing market, that was reflected in the social production of habitat, which we said it wasn't the luxury for individuals in people, but it was a result of this crisis, which we can list according to a number of factors: the reduction of the rent value of property, and this led owners to not be encouraged to produce new houses. Then there were the long-term rent contracts that were inherited from one generation to another, and this was also another obstacle to anyone who wanted to invest in real estate. As for the renters, this was much better than owning a housing unit in areas far away from cities. And the other factor was the nationalization policy that was one of the most significant characteristics of the system in Egypt. Many of the major public companies in construction and real estate investment were nationalized with the nationalization laws in 1961. And the private sector restricted itself to some construction works in values less than 30,000 pounds. In addition, the companies that were nationalized were no longer able to fulfill the need in the housing market because these companies were taken away from their owners. Those people who were put in charge of the companies lacked the sufficient experience to manage these companies, and therefore, of course, the volume of production in public sector companies was reduced, and the situation became necessary to employ the former owners of these companies for salary. And the government did not adhere to the 30,000 Egyptian pounds and increased it to 300,000 pounds for the private sector. So individuals were pushed to this form of social production of habitat because of this crisis. And many of the labor also moved to work in the construction of the IDAM in Aswan, where it was being built. One of the most significant elements increasing the size of these random houses was also the industrialization policy when rural inhabitants immigrated or migrated to Cairo. And when we came into the 70s, where the Egyptian state adopted the open economy system. This also increased the imbalance in the housing market in Egypt with these factors, the internal migration and the immigration of Egyptians to Gulf countries, the social production of habitat was seen on the outskirts of the cities, especially Cairo, to work in the field of construction, which increased during that period, due to the Egyptians working abroad, transferring money into Egypt, and most of this was directed or channeled to the real estate market. They didn't find a place for them in Cairo in the middle of the increase in prices. So they started building their own communities, thus increasing the pattern of social production of habitat on the outskirts of cities. And the Egyptian government did not interfere to plan this kind of production. Thus, these areas were random, were not planned. The annual growth reached 4.4%, and this was the first stage of this SPH, and it all mostly used agricultural land. The area of this kind of housing increased to host 2.74 million inhabitants. So the experience of social production of habitat in Egypt, people were pushed to it. It was not a planned experience. At the end, this experience became a major crisis in Egypt that involves poverty and a lack of services. And unfortunately, the solutions on part of the Egyptian government to address these areas are unaware of what is known as the social production of habitat, or the inhabitants themselves are capable of planning their own communities.
You don't
I
have
only
much
1
time, so
minute.
if you can start concluding.
The Egyptian government unaware that these people are able to plan a new community. The only experience in engaging people took place in the 2000s through a project called Build Your House that the Mubarak government issued before the revolution, where people would buy the land and plan for themselves with the governance and management. This project failed due to the corruption and the bribes that were paid. And although now this project has been there for 17 years, not one house was built in this area. The solution, or what is suggested, is to activate community development and participation, where the inhabitants themselves plan their houses with government management of this process in Egypt. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ibrahim, for this intervention. We ask the participants with us to pose questions to Mr. Serge or Mr. Ibrahim, or any comments they would like to share with us. Each participant has 1 to 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Desmond.
Thank you very much, Maha, and all the presenters, and also Enrique. I looked at the presentation of Enrique concerning the 5 phases of social production of habitat, in line with what the 2 presenters from the Africa have presented. And I actually see a challenge which working collectively on how to find a common ground, how to take this forward, in the sense that in most African countries, you find the issue of planning as a very difficult thing to deal with in terms of settlement. And even in terms of integration, there is a big challenge in that aspect. When we talk of the production of housing, we are not looking at in Africa, it's difficult for you to see it in terms of social production of housing. But what you find and you see is the market-driven production of housing and profit-oriented. Now, if we are looking up of this aspect, and then you talk about the cooperatives, even cooperatives in Africa, you find it difficult in having those housing cooperatives that will take up these issues or challenge. So how do we find a common ground? Looking at what Enrique has presented and following the 5 phases of social production of habitat, how do we find a common ground? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Desmond, for that contribution. We have another hand up. Anna, please go ahead and share your contributions. And we also welcome any other person to raise their hands or write in the chat. Anna, please go ahead. And then we have Irene.
Gracias, Diana.
Thank you so much, Diana. Well, thank you so much, Sir and Ibrahim, for having given us the context of their respective regions. What I would like to ask to Serge, and I think that he would have talked about the different periods. It wasn't clear to me, and maybe he said it, but what would be the possibilities within the limits that the population has of, on the one hand, engage, organize themselves in social production habitat processes? Serge, you mentioned that the land has issues. So I don't know how the access of the land issue is in case of popular sectors. And to Ibrahim, I would like to ask him about how the organization process of the population are established.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think we will just have a round of questions and then hopefully find some minutes for Saj, Ibrahim to respond. So Irene, go ahead, and then we have Hala in that order.
Thank you, Diana. I think for me, I would like to speak specifically to what Saj spoke about within the African context. And I'm wondering, and this is a question to Saj, can we take the discussions or the thoughts about the place of social production of habitat, specifically within the African context, against the principles that were pushed on African socialism? Because based on the history that Saj gave us earlier on, we can see that a lot of commodification of housing was brought immediately after colonization. And you see that during the period of post-colonization, the African leaders tried to speak about the place of African socialism, moving away from embracing the concepts of economic resource sharing and doing things together, mutuality in gaining growth of villages and where people live. So I'm trying to think about a place, a common ground where we can hinge the concept of social production of habitat, specifically within the context of Africa, and maybe Saj could think about it and probably tell me his thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Irene. Hala, go ahead.
شكرا لسيرجي
Thank you, Serge and Ibrahim, as well as Enrique. We listened today to many of the ideas that could be important in our current work and in the future with relation to habitat, especially that in the Arab region. Ibrahim is from the North Africa, and we are in the eastern part of the Arab world. In the MENA region, we have our other problems that may be a bit different, as well as having their certain impression. During 34 days, the Israeli occupation continues to destroy buildings and homes in Gaza, and there is a major problem in displacement where inhabitants have to leave their places. 45% of the infrastructure was completely destroyed in Gaza, and there is also about 240,000 buildings who were completely destroyed, meaning people don't have a place to resort to after occupation and after there is a complete reconstruction for intifada for the people to build or to rebuild their homes within the context of what we are saying today. Serge, Ibrahim, and Enrique, what can we say within this context, which is aggression? It involves aggression and occupation, not just killing people, genocide and destroying, but they also aim to occupy and control the land, which is the main resource we are talking about and defending or advocating for. The ability of humans to preserve and keep their land. Holding on to their land today is being interpreted in the world as aggression and as terrorism, but what we see today are double standards that are very clear on part of the Western world in addressing this issue in particular, because we are talking about habitat. While we live through these difficult circumstances in the Arab world, we can only talk about this situation that could be very far away from anything that has to do with rights, with being human, and the meanings and values we defend in our life today. Thank you, Hala. Mr. Serge and Ibrahim, go ahead to answer the questions of the participants.
Je peux commencer?
Yeah.
Bien.
Allow me to go first. So I think I'll start with Anna, who asked us a question on the problems, how can I put it? She asked about access to land. What I would say is that habitat is a real power in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, because access to land lays the foundation for habitat. And this is why I said we have a big problem, because one, if we have a public or we have an organization that is going to be controlling the land, another one that is talking about habitat, and especially in the case of Francophone Africa, when we have the name habitat is normally linked to the event Habitat 3. And land, there's a lot of speculation in matters of land. There's a lot of business people speculating with land, especially in urban areas. And like I said, these are regions where we have concentrations of population. And after looking at the statistics, I can't remember all of them. I think in this continent, more than 52% of the population is concentrated in towns. And this is a lot of pressure in terms of urban land. So the price of land is on a constant crescendo. And maybe I think our panelists might have touched on this, especially in Arabic countries. What we say in our countries is that in our countries, it's like land is like wine, and it with age, it even becomes more expensive. And I was just saying, maybe this might not apply to our friends from the Muslim countries, but this is the saying in our country. So we see this happening even in Gaza. It's a matter of land. And the whole issue, the whole war is based on an issue of land. And we have this land that is used for production. How would I put it? When we have bad governance, the biggest problem in bad governance is linked to land. I take the case of Cameroon, for example. Most of the cases that go to court take about 10 years to be resolved. And this discourages people, whether it is an individual or a company. It is hard to reorganize yourself when you have any land cases. And I'm going to go to the question that was asked by, I can't remember the name exactly. When you're talking about African socialism, I think we cannot talk about African socialism because African countries have had a cooperative experience since the Cold War even. But this is a model that politicians have tried to destroy because they want to accuse us of being socialists and communists. And they would like to erase these mentalities from us. Because as you might know, during the Cold War, the countries or the global South countries, we had a lot of people who were affected, who were eliminated during this period. So when you participated in these activities, for example, it was one of those things that was seen as organizations that were not following the system. So when you talk about the global South countries, and especially African countries, we cannot always copy-paste what we see in other countries. But we have to apply the solutions that come from Africa itself in terms of applying models of social production of habitat for a world which is seen as a small world. Because I think I've seen since I was a kid that this issue is affecting a lot of people. And we do have a real problem in terms of SPH. And it is usually the poorest, but also the middle class that is affected. Sorry, I lost him for a moment. I'm afraid I lost Serge. I'm afraid I've lost Serge. Maybe the facilitator can take over.
Thank you for that. I think because of time, I don't know if Ibrahim has very quick remarks because we need to conclude in the next 2 minutes. Ibrahim, any quick remarks and reactions to the questions asked by participants?
طيب عشان ضيق الوقت فهو بالنسبة
Now, because of the time limit, let me say that to answer the first question, how can people organize themselves in Egypt or in the Middle East and North Africa for the social production? In fact, there is no organization. It is something that is happening haphazardly. In fact, sometimes they just take some piece of land, and sometimes there is another reason. Sometimes it's because someone will build on a piece of agricultural land, and then his relative, his cousin, or whoever will be working in the same field, and he will be building in the same area. Another friend will come and just add another house. This is how it starts. This is how such informal settlements start and develop. This is the kind of social production that we have. In another question, thank you for telling us about what is happening and the genocide in Gaza and the terrorist processes that are being conducted by the Israelis against the Palestinians, and the international law, the whole world is just watching in silence. They just say they are not killing the soldiers, they are killing all the Palestinian urban areas. They are killing the children, they are killing civilians, and everyone is watching, everyone is participating, in fact, in such crime. The children of Gaza are being killed. No one is interfering, so we can't stop such evictions and dismantling of houses and all the violations that are taking place in Palestine. In fact, we are trying to actually go and send our voices to whoever can listen to us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you for your intervention. And please stay with us for another minute or two. So Arielle, perhaps you can take the floor now.
Thank you so much. I would have liked to have a little bit more of time to continue our conversation with Ibrahim and Serge. We understand perfectly well your concerns of what is going on in the Middle East. I would like to say that it is very important that throughout the sessions, this topic of the difficulties on the different contexts, all these specific challenges that we have, we all here in the coalition would be open to hear and to think in a jointly manner. What can we do? Because we keep on working for rights, for the decent housing organization processes, but we have to keep on doing it under this such a difficult context. Solidarity, collaboration are very, very important. I want to thank so much to our speakers, Ibrahim, Serge, and Enrique, for their contributions, and invite you all to add to our second session next Thursday, 16th of November, that will be held at the same time that this session with a roundtable to see social production of habitat on the practice. We will be sending you an email with the previous questions so you can participate at the Google Classroom. And you can share your perspectives in preparation to that second session. On the chat, you will have the links for the assessment or the evaluation for this session. We will thank you for completing it. Your feedback is important for us. And I don't know if our speakers want to take 1 minute just to close, or maybe somebody from our strategic team, because we have 71 attendees in this room. Thank you for joining us. And Enrique, do you want to say a word? It was really interesting to hear Serge and Ibrahim. We have lived similar things in Latin America, but maybe they are under much more difficult situations. We can understand it quite well. And I wanted to say that one of the things that we should be doing is we have a problem of attitudes, and I think that we can fight against those instead of us demanding things to whom are already linked to the power, and then they are interested in creating fear among us, on tagging us as communists, as Serge was saying. And on the other hand, they give the young people the hope that they will be successful. So they break solidarity, they break social organization. So I think that we should turn things around. And if we turn things around, we can move forward. And let's put life first, not us. And then communality. It is an organized work among us. And then us. We are part of life and we're part of the community. We won't be outsiders. But it is not going to be us that are controlling life, nor that are telling the community what they need to do. We are part of it. So turn things around will give us much more strength in the future. Something else that I want to add is that a great effort to have impact on public policies, but to have this advocacy, but not make it our central fight. What we are interested in, because we are seeing the answer of what was going on in Israel on the habitat side and all of those things, I think that we have to be very clear in our minds that we are not being subordinated to whatever the powers have to say, because established power can speak legally about us. So we need to organize ourselves, work together, and make concrete experiences that we can share with others. When we achieve things, we see that people are really enthusiastic. At this moment in time, land has become a way of challenging or channeling speculative money all around the world. It is an economic good. And that is why the land price is going up, skyrocketing. You know, the children of middle class can no longer afford an apartment. So we have to work very hard. Let's not delegate on others. Let's be aware that we need to work together. And I think that is the most important thing. And say that in Habitat 3, we have our future? No, not at all. We wanted to go to the Rise to the City, and the United Nations didn't even participate. So we have to find a way. We have to
hablar más bien de los bienes comunes para la vida. Los bienes comunes para la vida es lo que nos da la naturaleza y son bienes para la vida, no solamente para el ser humano, para los animales, para las plantas. Yo creo que
Not only for human beings, for plants. I think that is an important point, and there's good things considered by men, education, etc. But there's common goods for life that we are able to be aware of this. There's going to be a deep change that we can do. Thank you so much. Ibrahim, do you want to add anything else?
Thank you very much that you invited me to be with you today. It was my pleasure to be with you, and I hope, inshallah, to be with you in other sessions. Thank you very much.
Gracias a todas y
Well,
todos.
thank you so much, everyone, for this. With this, we conclude our first session of this space of mutual learning. Thank you for being here with us, co-learning. We will see you here Thursday, the 16th, at the same hour. You will receive a new link with all of the instructions. Thank you so much. Please don't miss that meeting and participate, evaluating this session and responding to the classroom answers. I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Enrico. Enrique, it is always a pleasure to hear you.
We take a picture together before we leave. Yeah?
ناخذ صورة أرني.
Hola Adriana, ¿cómo estás?
Ariella, a picture, a group picture now, Hala is suggesting.
We will take it. Diana?
Diana, could you help us with that?
Okay,
These are three
sure.
screens.
Okay, I'll take it now. I want to see those big smiles. Thank you for such a wonderful session. I'll now take screen 2. Big smiles, everyone. Okay, and the last slide. Thank you. All good. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you next week.
Gracias.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas
Thank you.
gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias, Enrique. Gracias, Sergio.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Sergey. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Shukran, gracias.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Dana, bye. Bye,
Bye,
everybody. Yes.
Estuvo bueno, ¿no? A los otros, el africano lo empecé a escuchar y te digo, luego se...
Muy bueno.
Diana, could you help us to close? We need to stay